Tanse and hello. My name is Michael Auger.
Tanse, my name is P.D. Shelafu. I'm a member of the Driftpile Cree Nation, and Michael is a member of the Big Stone Cree Nation. We are proud Cree filmmakers from within the Treaty 8 territory, and our company is called Tokapi Cinema Limited.
Back in October, at the request of the Treaty 8 Chiefs of Alberta organization, we documented on video the first search for unmarked graves within the Treaty 8 territory at the site of the St. Bernard Residential School at Gruard, Alberta, which is adjacent to the Kapaweno First Nation.
As filmmakers, we believe in recording and documenting this historical and critical work of the search for unmarked graves at all the residential schools throughout Treaty 8 and all across Canada.
With love and in solemn respect for all of our people who suffered in residential school, and especially for those who didn't make it home, we worked on these videos in the name of justice, healing, and in the spirit of calling on Canada to truly and fully honor the treaties so that we as Indigenous peoples can once again fully realize our inherent rights to health, prosperity, and self-determination as guaranteed by the nation-to-nation treaty that is number 8.
Good day, everybody. I guess we had a gathering a while back in August, and leading up to that, we talked with the elders, and they gave us some stories about Gruard Residential School, and we followed it up with some ground penetrating radar systems that were just done today. But the analyzation of the work that has been done to date is going to take a little time. Probably by December we might have a final report, and we'll be sharing that with everybody else as we go forward. Now, I know everybody is asking all kinds of questions of what we found. We won't know that till the final report is in. If there's COVID goes down, then we will be having gatherings in late December, maybe even early January. We're getting the truth done for the residential schools, kids that never made it home from that school. So now we're trying to bring closure to the survivors and saying we're going to find out what happened. Our partners are Dr. Kisa and the Herb Department. So that's who we're working with the U of A. So as we go forward and they complete their work, we'll have more of an understanding where everything's at. But it's going to take time. Don't expect answers till later. You know, we didn't wait for the provincial or federal government to give us funding. We found that it was important to go ahead with this work and start that whole process. So with that being said, saying, you know, the work will still happen. And hopefully it'll help the other First Nations do their work at their levels and at their home base. That has to happen. A lot of that work that is happening is going to take a while. You know, if the stories you share is very hurtful, and you know, we set up some people such as therapists and psychologists that people can talk to if it's they share their stories with us, and we know it's going to be bringing up really dark past, and we got to have those people around so they could seek those comforts and seek the help that they need. We can cross this heavy road we're going to be traveling on, you know, and hopefully we bring the kids home, you know, and at the end of the day we do justice and we seek justice, you know. It's going to be a long road, but I think we'll get there. With the team that we have in place, there's nothing that can stop us from achieving that. And thanks for your patience with us. It's been a trying time. Thank you.
Nanasko munda tu tim tego manos chakasti paitsagan iwapahtamika kamusita yak akam mskoasum ta kiwai takamga kuta Kapaweno reward uniga niu Chief Halcro Task Force Committee estigi niga nohta ko matuskiun kihtie pikskata to maotsiha to kihtie ja tanto magum gagi hastigo magsnohmatugam gitahuga wassakagi huatagihto ngotanigo kispi chagitakawi sapapahtamiho huhtsapachechigana ta wihtamihkigo aigutaitamih yastig igugi machihtak niwa sapo pisem October gagi mihtigi machihtak gua anuhchigisihtak gua nanaskumana nakihtiayak ogimau uyasuiwag tansi se sitoskahkooma guasti 38 tansi se mamauihuto gua utahuhtsi nanto oma kaskatnu pisem apuni paumahau pisem nanto iguspi nanto tagisihtakoma mamau kiguaimskamihkuta guamagan tunamihni tantahtoa wassag kiguaimskamihkuta muita gisihtsigatio guamma tuskiun iskuhk kise kanoapahtakoa umata tuskiun uusapapahchagana huapahtakoawi nanto gutta ni paimihau pisem ni annosapagimihcha wastiisi itatitamih kuspi nanto kahkio guamma kiguaigamskako tatutsigati uguspi oma atuskiun no vakanito anugimau halcro gagi pisiwiptsigit 38 pipikskoasta pukutatoskatamakum pukutamamauihuya kawastiise huia mihtsi tuumai sinuag 38 kagihtigainani utipahamaatun mihtsitigi pagamskaguto utakaks matsigi guamutsigi huisamguiahta tapiuita tuskimaah guegutautsigo ahkama omga uitsiwagan tuyak mamawi kik tatoskatamihuma matsigi gutaysko nanaskuman guanmi guastsaya oma ksnohamatun university gitumagak Alberta higunikagi uitsiwagan mato nihioskuo muta tuskiun magi guana uksnohamaksun uia tanstaunah tansi aski tantahisi ahtsitsigati gahpu hawia kigoigi atuskatak huatikatak munah kigoi gahpu pitsi naiwats tansipi takamgak iksuta tuskiuna wisku matsaga guyu tanstaunam kigoigi takamgak tanstaunam tanta askigi tapskuts gi pigunamih kigoiuhtsi igungukagi huitsiwagan mayaho matsaga guamuhtsi nanaskumundagis niganuhtaguyahkaya Chief Halcro tani kuma tuskiun gagitsihawak iguamma tapuya pitsin naiwats pitsinawi sinuag kagih piatsamuto tapskuts ugimau gaituit gipiatsamustauto sinuag uhatsamuna kayatsamustoun gismugin tawihtin gigoita tutaman igihituit gihitatuta sinima hatsamustagu olutahkitaya nonuts gueguni hatsamuna hugig gutakagi piwitsi tomksnohma tugam gohuho gi piaimihuto piguatagihito guhatihta wassaki mataguhto gontsega kiguautsaga stayspi-tawihtagohkuma tapskut tataguhtimagahkita tataguhtiahkita tatuma tapuun gahkiu imuskastig guegutautsigo awastisigihtiayaktagi nahihtamuntakkuya yato inikaigusuntakkuya yato yahkamatuskatsagati kiguayomgagi piguihtamuhiguto pitsaginuisgo nuito anaschi piaksap ainanium chuidigagihtig piaksapigi huhuksnohmatugam gueguta guanstamu maiguskatsuma reward sapapachagati gumaski matsaga tapsku kituitugimau kussugonuma tuskiun kussugonum miskanogawih muhtiah baksimun magamamo isko kahkio kisitsagatig uhatuskiuna matsaga CPU-sig gua muigagihnanikснano umutsatuskiun ipapitah matsaga baksimunan tasipi miak, tasipi usig, ngwa matsaga kwes katutino. Gagwamma kuichikimun, kigwaichiga kimsko asumtnao. Aguasumtnao po kigwayutsum sumat tansu ya pipiso apahtamako taisko. Gagwamma gamsko asumtnao tapskuts ya aseyoma ogimao helkro sid helkro aseyguyo piwapahtam tan sitagi hisinawats katawassitsigi. Matsaga kisihimtnao siwiptamah pikskwati kigwaiga kihtutina po nawats katawa. Maga kigwayasti kagihtig tamamawe kihtieyag kio gapi paskigum gapi sapuskamigo magsnamatugam go pikskwatug mamawihug matsaga atsamustatug tantamaga gihtnao kagihastigo igom magagihtigo iskoya atsastigit itanutsugimauta ispi mskamahi igommat tanta tuho awassaguka mskato ispi gomma gahkioga ayaya huta kisaya kanoapahtsagati ko esko kichinahu nigo nihuwa guttasuna gahkioga spia samni huisamgui kihtieyag matsagigutaka katsamustagaw na guanma au igu gits kutsig reward gwakiap ntaat kutaga awastisi matsaga paksimon taya asamna sipiusik gwa paksimtnan takamay mihaig maskausi unuhtsi gwa sipiusu unuhtsi kigaitagi tagwaiwak tagihituyan aya ngskitinda omaski imsuyaski aya nuhtikski tamag tapskutsu manotso ogumao helkrogitit may oma pihtago kinantau simak kuichikimun ti Spain tantatugim skinao guanma kuichikimun kigwaiga kasihimtnao aya kiana uhtsi nihiawag mainaniu nihiawag teni ainanium gagihti kiana uhtsi umaga kaisitsigia kapikskwatta matsaga tagihtsinahuig kitunigani muawag kagihti muawag yakamatos ko numa ngamay gakko yakamitachamga yakamatos kata mekan kakiagi goitam skatsgati utamunehigati utinigan eksegutaisko hey.
Yeah, so the technology we're using is a ground penetrating radar. What it is it's an antenna that we pull along the surface of the ground and it sends down a radar wave. So it's basically sending a radar wave down into the ground. And what we're looking for when we use it is how that wave reflects. So it's hitting different things in the surface, so the soil, the compaction of the soil, or a rock or a pipe, or potentially a grave shaft. And we collect information about the way that wave reflects over a grid. So we lay out a grid, we run lines, and we collect that information. When we're looking for graves in particular, we're not actually able to see a body or bones or anything like that. What we're actually looking for is where the grave itself, the pit, was dug, and a coffin or casket placed, or even a shroud burial. We can see that as well. So we're looking for breaks in how the soil goes along, and then there's a break, and then there's a certain depth of the pit. Ground penetrating radar is good at defining the kind of shape, orientation, and depth of what we call anomalies. When those anomalies have certain characteristics, such as they are a meter long, a meter and a half long, rectangular or oval in shape at 75 centimeters, so 2 to 3 feet down, we start to say, okay, this is likely to be a grave. There are other anomalies that we do detect in the ground penetrating radar, but we have experience in knowing what those are. A metal pipe is very clear. We know it's not a grave. And then we also can see rocks and other things like that. One of the challenges we face is that depending on how the burials took place, we may or may not be able to see them as clearly. It's most clear in a graveyard where we have similar orientation, often rows of graves, things like that. When we're looking for things that are more hidden or clandestine, A single pit, for example, is harder to understand as a grave, but we will keep looking until we are confident that we've covered the areas we need to cover to try to detect these anomalies. And then we can build our confidence. We tend to have a system where we talk about possible and probable graves. So probable graves have a lot of the characteristics we'd expect. Possible graves have some. And so that's the kind of information that we'll be able to hopefully provide. So if we find anomalies that are possible or probable graves, there's a few things that could be considered afterwards. If you absolutely want to be sure that it's a grave, ultimately you'd have to dig it up, because we can never say 100% for sure. But in places where there's organized graves, where we're in a cemetery, we can get pretty sure, like we can get close to 100% sure. But this is one of the challenges we're facing, is because we don't actually know if there's a body in there with the technology we have, then there needs to be a conversation about those next steps. We also can try different other sorts of geophysical techniques. So there's some other ways to look below the surface that can help us confirm. So those are some other options that could take place. We also have different frequencies of the antennas, so the wavelength, and the ones we use for graves usually penetrate about 1.5 meters to 2 meters, and there are ones that we can go deeper or shallower if we need to as well. So there's other techniques we can try. So we do have a number of sensors that we can mount onto drones. The one that we've been using out here so far is what's called a multispectral camera. It takes a series of pictures at different spectrums of light. So it's just taking a picture of the surface, but sometimes the surface can tell us information about what's below the surface. And this particular camera is good at detecting changes in the health of vegetation. So if you're ever out walking around and you see certain patches of vegetation growing, sometimes that has to do with the soil composition. So what's in the soil below. Human activity can change the vegetation that grows, and that includes potentially digging graves. So when you dig the grave, you stir up the soil, and then the plants that grow on top of the grave may look different from plants that aren't on top of a grave. So we're using that technique to help see if we can map out any graves. There also are drone-mounted ground-penetrating radar units that we've been collaborating with the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology to use. They may not be able to give us the same level of detail, but they might be useful if we're trying to narrow down a large area, because the ground penetrating radar that we use takes a long time. We can maybe cover, a quarter to a half an acre in a good day, right? And if you have acres and acres to search, we're trying to narrow those things down. Another technology that we know about is LiDAR, which also maps the surface of the ground. And you can see, for example, depressions or mounds that might be associated with graves. And there are some circumstances where LiDAR can be very helpful, especially if an area is really treed. So if there's a lot of trees, that sometimes can be a useful tool as well. So our first step when we are asked to come in and evaluate where there might be unmarked graves associated with the residential school is we like to come out and assess and look at what areas are known. Do we know information about where people are buried? Are there knowledge in the community about other places we should look? Survivors often have knowledge of things they've experienced. And then we provide usually a phased approach. So we'll say, here's our phase 1 areas we want to look at. We will come out, we'll collect all that information, and then we need to do a bunch of processing. So we don't know immediately. We know usually if we're starting to see things, but we don't know exactly what we're seeing. So we have to go back to our lab, and it could be, several weeks before we have a full sense of all the data being processed. And then our goal is to try to get information back to the community as quickly as possible. But usually that's going to be, 1 or 2 months in the future before we can present those sort of preliminary results and talk about next steps.
The search for unmarked graves is challenging and emotional work. However, by everyone coming together, we can support each other and come out on the other side stronger and healthier and bring forth the full and complete truth of residential schools and the legacy that we constantly face, but one that we shall overcome.
In that spirit, we hope that these videos have helped shed some light on this work, and you will continue to support the many dedicated people who are doing everything they can to uncover the truth, so that we can find peace, resolution, truth, and justice through the search of unmarked graves at all the residential schools throughout Treaty 8.